Welcome to Sociology. This is the Sociological Perspective Big Show. It's our first one of the year, and I hope to give you some information to get you started in what is probably the most important class taught at Urbandale High School. Sociology is the scientific study of social structure, and I want to emphasize scientific study there because it does use research, it uses data. It's not just people's guesswork. It's not necessarily based on opinion, it's based on data collected in a scientific fashion of social structure. Where psychology looks at individuals, sociology looks at the bigger interaction of people. One of the focuses on social structure, which is the framework of society and the main institutions in a society, such as family, education, laws, and religion, and how those interact, how they're formed, and the impact they have on individuals. The social structure has pieces like religion and education and the family and our judicial system, and all of these interact and they push and pull on each other, and nothing exists in isolation. And those are some of the things we're going to be looking at this semester. Social structure is the pattern ways in which people interact in social relationships. The focus is on patterns rather than on individual actions. We're not going to look at why an individual person might do what he or she might do, but we're going to look at bigger patterns of how people act. That's the biggest difference between psychology and sociology. The sociological perspective is a particular point of view. We're going to help to understand why people make some of the choices they make, and it typically, and this is where it's again different from psychology, where there might be interest in some kind of psychosis or psychological problem. But for example, someone chose to make this shirt, the fart now loading, and they sold it. And they didn't just make one, they made lots of shirts, because there's lots of people who would wear these shirts and want to wear these shirts. And we're going to look at what helps to make decisions like that. Sociology looks beyond personal perspective. It's interested in exposing the causes and sources of human behavior. The causes and sources. Why are we the way we are? The sociological perspective helps us understand how people are influenced by the society and culture in which they live. This young man, probably 10, 11 years old, going to an ISIS school, an ISIS-run school, certainly has a different view of the world than if you were 10 and 11 and went to an elementary school in Urbandale. Or if you're a little older, went to Urbandale Middle School or the high school. It also helps us understand how people's actions and beliefs help change society and culture over time. Help us understand why people feel the way they do and why they act the way they do, and that's what we're going to look at this semester. And I want to draw a distinction between individual versus societal problems. I want to help explain what factors lead to societal problems. Look at the fact that this young man, Dylan Rufus, I believe his name is, and these are pictures taken from his Facebook page before he went in to shoot parishioners at a church. One person posting these pictures is an individual problem, but it might become a societal problem when these things start to spread and become more commonplace. We're not going to focus on the individual, but on patterns of behavior shared by categories of people. Patterns of behavior shared by categories of people help us understand the big patterns of things that happen. We're going to look at group versus individual behavior. People's behavior within a group setting cannot be predicted from their personal characteristics. You are going to do things differently in a mob or in a riot than you might do all by yourself. We're going to also look at conformity. Members of a group tend to think, feel, and behave in similar ways. there is enormous amount of pressure to have you conform, to have me conform, and when you don't conform, you are punished by the larger group. Members of a group generally tend to conform even when the personal preferences are not the same as the group. These hipsters, whether they want to wear the long beards or don't want to wear the long beards or dress that way, they tend to conform. People tend to conform because they're rewarded when they conform and they're punished when they don't. Sociologists assume that social relationships are not determined only by the particular characteristics of the people involved. These white supremacists, you might look at them and assume something about who they are as individuals or something about them as individuals, but in truth, they may have a lot in common with lots of other people, but have different environmental factors. So we're going to look at, as sociologists, the relationships that people have and not just about the particular idiosyncrasies of an individual. We're also going to look at the sociological imagination, which is the ability to see the link between society and self, about putting yourself in someone else's shoes. How would it feel to be them? Can you step in their shoes and see the world through their eyes? It's understand how social forces affect our lives. For example, if you can understand someone else's perspective, then you can step out of yourself and begin to see how society affects you. This young lady here is taking a selfie. Now I realize I'm old, but when I grew up, as I was growing up, people didn't take pictures of themselves. Ever. They might have pictures taken of them, but they rarely took pictures of themselves. And now it is commonplace. And it's typical for old people to want to say, well, that's bad because we didn't do it that way. It's neither good nor bad. It just is. And for you, now, you have all the societal pressure to have lots of selfies. You take pictures of yourself all the time. In fact, whether it's Snapchat or Instagram or whatever social media you want to use, it's the driving force of that. It's okay, but it's relatively new. And it's caused by societal pressures that force us to act in a particular way. And most of the time, we just see that as normal. Well, it is normal for us, but it hasn't always been that way. And that should tell you something else, that it won't always be that way. If 40 years ago, people didn't take pictures of themselves, or very rarely, and today they do, you should not assume that forever in your life that people will always do that. They may not. People don't make decisions in isolation. You decide what is cool and what is not by forces that you may not even be aware of. You decide how to dress, how to act, how to talk, what's important, what's not important, by all kinds of outside forces, and the sociological imagination allows you to step out of yourself and see how those forces act upon you. And you begin developing a sociological imagination helps us understand this connection. 40 years ago, two groups of people had tattoos. We had sailors and outlaws. You had a tattoo, you were trying to convey an image, and it was a pretty rough image. Now everyone has tattoos. If not everyone, we have middle-aged women have tattoos on their hands and their legs and their arms, and we have all kinds of young people having tattoos on, like the sleeve on this woman. And it is commonplace. It's considered to be a cool thing to do, a good thing to do. But again, I want to emphasize to you, those decisions didn't happen in isolation, and they did see change in society. And if it's changed in the past, it will probably continue to change in the future. And the sociological imagination helps you understand how these things impact you. We talked a little bit before about group versus individual behavior. Normally law-abiding citizens may act much differently in extreme group situations. just like students will behave differently in a classroom with the teacher than when there's a sub in the room. And you can't assume that they are somehow bad or deviant because they act a certain way in a different situation. People act differently in a group versus individual behavior. And that is our introduction to the first section of sociology.